In a world where media bias divides our nation, one unexpected moment changed everything. What started as a routine interview on Morning Perspectives with Catherine Walsh turned into an event that would shake the foundations of American media. This is the untold story of how a young social media star's appearance on a prestigious news show exposed decades of hidden agendas and family secrets, leading to a revelation that would unite a divided country. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. This is a story you won't want to miss. The crisp autumn morning in New York City seemed ordinary enough as Catherine Walsh strode through the glass doors of the Global News Network building. At 63, she was considered the grande dame of morning television, having interviewed presidents, world leaders, and countless celebrities over her 30-year career. Her silver hair, always perfectly coiffed, caught the early morning light as she made her way to her usual pre-show meeting. "The numbers are dropping again, Catherine," said Marcus Chen, her executive producer, sliding a tablet across the conference table. "We need something big, something controversial." His eyes held a glimmer of anticipation. "That's why we've booked Jake Paul for tomorrow's show." Catherine's hand froze midway to her coffee cup. "The boxer? The social media personality?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "Marcus, this isn't what we do. We're a serious news program." "That's exactly why we need this," Marcus insisted. "His views, his audience, they're everything our traditional viewers oppose. The tension will be explosive, perfect for ratings." What Catherine didn't know was that this decision would unravel a web of secrets that began long before she became a household name. In her desk drawer lay an old photograph, yellow with age, showing a young woman standing beside a familiar face, one that would soon connect her to Jake Paul in ways she could never imagine. The following morning, as Jake Paul walked into the studio, the tension was palpable. The crew members whispered among themselves, some excited, others apprehensive. At 26, Jake exuded a confidence that both irritated and intrigued Catherine. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, a departure from his usual casual attire, and carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his grandfather. "Good morning, Ms. Walsh," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for having me on your show." Catherine took his hand briefly, noting the firmness of his grip. "Mr. Paul, I trust you're prepared to discuss your recent controversial statements about media bias." "Oh, I'm prepared for much more than that," he replied, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As he sat down in the guest chair, he placed his grandfather's briefcase carefully beside him, patting it once, a gesture that would later prove to be far more significant than anyone could have guessed. The red light on camera 1 blinked on, and Catherine launched into her signature introduction. "Good morning, America. Today we're joined by social media personality and boxer Jake Paul, who recently made headlines with his criticism of mainstream media's political coverage." The interview began smoothly enough, with standard questions about Jake's career and social media presence. But 15 minutes in, everything changed. "Mr. Paul, you've repeatedly accused traditional media outlets of manipulating the truth. Isn't this just another case of a young influencer trying to gain attention by attacking respected institutions?" Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "Actually, Ms. Walsh, I have something here that might change your perspective on respected institutions." He reached for his grandfather's briefcase, and the studio fell silent. 30 years ago, he continued, a young journalist wrote a piece exposing corruption in political media coverage. That story was buried and the journalist was blacklisted. That journalist was your sister, Eleanor Walsh. Catherine's face paled. The photograph in her desk drawer flashed through her mind. Her sister Eleanor, standing beside Jake Paul's grandfather, Robert Paul, at the Washington post offices in 1993. "How did you—" Catherine's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "My grandfather kept everything," Jake replied, pulling out a manila envelope, "including the full investigation Eleanor conducted, and the letters she wrote to you, begging for help when they threatened to destroy her career." The studio light suddenly felt too bright, too hot. Catherine's carefully constructed world of media prestige began to crumble as Jake Paul revealed document after document, painting a picture of systemic bias and corruption that had destroyed not only Eleanor's career, but also the life of Robert Paul, who had tried to help her. The live feed numbers skyrocketed as viewers watched the unfolding drama. Catherine Walsh, the unshakable voice of morning television, sat in stunned silence as 30 years of guilt and hidden truths came to light. As the first commercial break approached, Jake leaned back in his chair, his earlier smile replaced by a look of genuine concern. Ms. Walsh, I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here because your sister and my grandfather fought for something important, the truth, and it's time we finished what they started. The red light blinked off, but the cameras continued rolling, capturing what would become one of the most talked about moments in television history. The commercial break stretched on like an eternity. In her private dressing room, Catherine Walsh's hands trembled as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. 30 years of carefully constructed narratives were unraveling before millions of viewers. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from network executives, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them. 5 minutes, Ms. Walsh, called a production assistant through the door. In the guest green room, Jake Paul sat quietly, examining an old black and white photograph. It showed his grandfather, Robert Paul, and Eleanor Walsh celebrating after breaking a major story about political corruption in 1992. The joy in their faces stood in stark contrast to what would happen just months later. Marcus Chen burst into Catherine's dressing room without knocking. "We need to shut this down," he demanded. His usual calm demeanor shattered. "The network president is on the line. We can cut to pre-recorded content. Cite technical difficulties." "No." Catherine's voice was firm as she applied a fresh coat of lipstick. "For 30 years, I've lived with what we did to Eleanor. I watched my little sister lose everything because she dared to tell the truth." She turned to face Marcus. "I won't bury her story again." When the red light blinked back on, the tension in the studio was electric. Social media was exploding with clips from the first segment, and the live viewer count had doubled. "Welcome back to Morning Perspectives," Catherine began, her voice carrying a new weight. "Mr. Paul, before the break, you shared some revealing information about my sister Eleanor and your grandfather. Perhaps you could tell our viewers what happened to them after their investigation was suppressed." Jake pulled out another document from the briefcase. "They didn't give up," he said. "Even after Eleanor was blacklisted, she and my grandfather continued investigating privately. They uncovered a network of media executives, politicians, and corporate interests working together to control public narratives." He paused, looking directly at Catherine. "They were getting close to exposing everything when they died, in what was ruled a car accident in 1994. The studio fell silent. Catherine's perfectly maintained composure cracked as a tear rolled down her cheek. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" "No, Ms. Walsh, it wasn't. And I think you've known that all along." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "The question is, why did you spend the next 30 years working for the very people who destroyed your sister's life?" Catherine took a deep breath, looking past the cameras to the framed photographs on her office wall. Decades of interviews with powerful figures, each one a reminder of the compromise she'd made. "Because I was a coward," she admitted, her voice breaking. "They offered me this show, this career, everything I'd ever wanted. All I had to do was stay quiet about Eleanor." "And now?" Jake asked, opening his grandfather's briefcase one final time. "Now," Catherine said, straightening her shoulders, "I think it's time to finish what Eleanor and Robert started." "What's in that last folder, Mr. Paul?" Jake smiled, a mix of triumph and sadness in his eyes. "Everything. Names, dates, documents. Everything your sister and my grandfather collected. Their final investigation, complete but never published. They mailed it to my mother the day before they died, with instructions to keep it safe until the right moment. And you think this is that moment? Ms. Walsh, look at your phone. Look at social media. Millions of people are watching right now. From every political background, every age group united in wanting to know the truth. The very division they've created to control us is what's bringing people together to expose them." Catherine nodded, then turned to face camera one. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see will change everything you think you know about American media. But first I need to tell you about my sister Eleanor, and about a brave man named Robert Paul, and about the night I made a decision that would haunt me for the next 30 years. The revelations that followed would shake the foundations of American media, but more importantly, they would begin a journey of redemption for Catherine Walsh, a journey that was about to take an even more unexpected turn." The global news network building was in chaos. Security guards rushed through hallways as network executives demanded access to the studio. But the production crew, inspired by the unfolding truth, had locked the doors, determined to let Catherine and Jake finish what they'd started. "The documents show a pattern," Jake continued, spreading papers across the interview desk. "Every major narrative shift of the past 3 decades was orchestrated. The goal wasn't just controlling information, it was dividing people, making them distrust each other instead of questioning those in power." Catherine picked up one of the papers, her hands steady now. "This memo, it's from the night Eleanor died. She wasn't heading to a random dinner like the police report claimed. She was meeting a source, Senator William Morrison. The same Senator Morrison who died of a heart attack 2 days later," Jake added, "and whose grandson now sits on the Global News Network board of directors." Suddenly, the studio lights flickered. Marcus Chen's voice came through the studio speakers. "Catherine, this is your last warning. End this broadcast now." Instead of complying, Catherine stood up, her silver hair catching the studio lights. "You know what's remarkable, Mr. Paul? All these years I thought I was protecting myself by staying quiet. But really, I was just making myself smaller, less human. Every scripted interview, every blocked story, they were all chains binding me to Eleanor's betrayal." The lights flickered again, but Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see isn't just about media corruption. It's about how fear can make us complicit in our own oppression. But more importantly, it's about how it's never too late to choose courage over comfort." Jake opened another folder, revealing photographs of a remote cabin in the Adirondacks. "Ms. Walsh, did you ever wonder why they never found Eleanor's body in the car wreck?" Catherine's face went pale. "What are you saying?" "The accident was staged, but not everyone involved was willing to go through with murder. My grandfather had friends, people who believed in what he and Eleanor were doing. They helped fake their deaths, gave them new identities. They've been living off the grid, continuing their work, gathering evidence, and they're both still alive." The studio erupted in gasps. Catherine gripped the desk for support. "Eleanor, my sister is alive." "Yes," Jake said softly, "and she's watching right now, along with thousands of other journalists, whistleblowers, and truth-seekers who've been silenced over the years. They've all been waiting for this moment, this broadcast, when someone finally had the courage to break the chain of silence." The studio doors burst open as security finally breached the barricade, but before they could reach the set, every screen in the studio lit up with a familiar face, Eleanor Walsh. 30 years older, but unmistakable, broadcasting from an undisclosed location. "Hello, Catherine," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's time we finished what we started." What followed would not only reunite two sisters but spark a revolution in American media that no one could have predicted. But first, Catherine Walsh would have to make one final choice, one that would put everything she'd built at risk. The security team froze in their tracks as Eleanor Walsh's face filled every screen in the studio. After 30 years in hiding, she looked different, her once dark hair now silver like Catherine's, her face lined with wisdom rather than age. But her eyes still held the same fierce determination that had driven her to risk everything for the truth. "The cabin you see behind me," Eleanor continued, "has been my home and my newsroom for 3 decades. Robert and I built a network of truth-tellers, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. And thanks to Jake, that moment is now." Catherine stepped closer to the nearest screen, tears streaming freely now. "All these years, I thought I was protecting your memory. Instead, I was protecting the very people who tried to destroy you." "You did what you thought you had to do," Eleanor replied gently. "But now it's time for everyone to see what Robert and I discovered. Evidence that goes far beyond media manipulation. We uncovered a decades-long conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in America." Jake pulled out the final set of documents from his grandfather's briefcase. These papers show direct links between media executives, political leaders, and what they called the Narrative Control Initiative. They didn't just want to influence public opinion. They wanted to reshape reality itself. Suddenly, the studio doors burst open again. This time, FBI agents entered, led by a stern-faced woman in her 50s. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez," she announced. "And we've been building a case against the NCI for the past 5 years. Ms. Walsh, Mr. Paul, everything you've revealed today just gave us the final pieces we needed." Marcus Chen tried to slip away but was quickly detained by 2 agents. "Marcus Chen," Agent Martinez said, "we have some questions about your weekly meetings with Senator Morrison's grandson." As Chen was led away in handcuffs, Catherine turned back to the screen showing her sister. "Eleanor, I need to know. Why now? Why Jake?" Eleanor smiled. "Because he reminds me of us, Catherine. Young, passionate, unafraid to challenge the system. But more importantly, because he has something we never had. The power to reach millions instantly, without going through traditional media gatekeepers. My grandfather never stopped believing in what you were doing," Jake added. He knew social media would eventually break their monopoly on information. That's why he made sure I understood the responsibility that comes with having a platform. But as the truth seemed finally within reach, a new threat emerged. The studio lights went dark, and Eleanor's feed cut out. Emergency generators hummed to life, casting an eerie red glow across the set. "They're trying to shut us down," Agent Martinez warned. "But they don't realize we're broadcasting on every major social media platform now. Millions are watching, sharing, preserving every piece of evidence." In the darkness, Catherine Walsh made her final choice. "Eleanor," she spoke into the cameras, knowing her sister would find a way to see this, "you once stood alone against this system. You won't stand alone anymore." What no one in the studio realized was that the biggest revelation, and the most dangerous one, was still to come. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the studio as Catherine Walsh's production team worked frantically to restore power. But in those shadows, a truth darker than anyone imagined was about to emerge. Robert Paul Sr., Jake's grandfather, appeared suddenly on the remaining functional screen. His face was weathered but determined, broadcasting from a different location than Eleanor. "There's something else everyone needs to see," he said, his voice grave. "Something Eleanor and I discovered just last week." Jake opened the false bottom of the briefcase. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he found the hidden compartment. Inside lay a single USB drive, its metallic surface reflecting the red emergency lights. "What's on this, Grandpa?" "Evidence of Project Eclipse. The real reason they tried to silence us 30 years ago. It wasn't just about controlling the media. They were testing something far more insidious. Technology to manipulate not just what people think, but how they think." Agent Martinez stepped forward. "Mr. Paul, are you talking about the Neural Response Initiative? We thought those were just rumors." "They were perfecting it back in '94, Robert continued, using broadcast frequencies to subtly influence brainwave patterns. "But now, with social media algorithms and AI," he paused, looking directly into the camera. "They're not just dividing us anymore. They're rewiring us." The studio door opened again, and a tall figure entered. William Morrison III, grandson of the late senator and board member of Global News Network. But instead of the anger everyone expected, his face showed resignation. "It was never supposed to go this far," Morrison said, raising his hands as FBI agents approached. "My grandfather tried to stop it. That's why he was meeting Eleanor that night. But they got to him first." Catherine's voice cut through the tension. "Who are they, Mr. Morrison? Who's really behind all of this?" Before he could answer, every screen in the studio flickered to life with the same image, a simple black logo of an eclipse. A digitally altered voice filled the room. "Congratulations on your persistence, Ms. Walsh." "Mr. Paul, but did you really think we'd let you expose everything? In 30 seconds, a targeted electromagnetic pulse will wipe every device in a 5-block radius. All your evidence, all your broadcasts, gone." But Jake Paul smiled. "Actually," he said, holding up his phone, "we were counting on that." He turned to Catherine. "Your sister taught my grandfather something important. Always have a backup plan." The voice faltered. "What do you mean?" While everyone was focused on the documents and the briefcase, a quantum encrypted broadcast has been streaming everything to secure servers worldwide. The more you try to bury the truth, the more it spreads. Game over. The screens went dark, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, racing across the globe at the speed of light, impossible to contain. But as Catherine Walsh would soon discover, exposing the truth was only the beginning. The real battle, and the most personal one, was still to come. The aftermath of the broadcast shook America to its core. As dawn broke over New York City the next morning, Catherine Walsh stood in Central Park, waiting. The morning joggers passed by, unaware they were witnessing a moment 30 years in the making. "You still take your coffee black?" a familiar voice asked. Eleanor Walsh emerged from the morning mist, holding 2 steaming cups. Behind her walked Robert Paul Sr., leaning on a cane but standing tall. The sisters embraced, 3 decades of separation dissolving in tears. "I'm so sorry," Catherine whispered. "I should have been braver." "You were brave when it mattered most," Eleanor replied. "And now, look." She held up her phone, showing social media feeds exploding with revelations. Project Eclipse's exposure had triggered a nationwide awakening. People from all political backgrounds were coming together, sharing stories of manipulation, discovering how they'd been played against each other. Jake Paul arrived minutes later, accompanied by Agent Martinez. "The arrests have begun," the agent reported. Morrison's testimony opened everything. The Neural Response Initiative's servers are being dismantled. But more importantly, people are talking to each other again. Really talking, not just arguing. But what about the network? Catherine asked. My career. Jake smiled. That's actually why I'm here. We're launching something new. A platform for unfiltered, unmanipulated news. No algorithms, no hidden agendas. Just truth. And we need someone with experience, integrity, and the courage to admit when they were wrong. Catherine looked at her sister. Both of us, she said firmly. We started this journey together 30 years ago. It's time we finished it together. Robert Paul Sr. stepped forward, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. You did good, kid. Your parents would be proud. He turned to the Walsh sisters. Ready to shake things up one more time? Eleanor laughed, a sound Catherine hadn't heard in 30 years. You know what the best part is? They tried to divide us, turn us against each other. Instead, they brought us all together. Left, right, young, old. Turns out the truth is the greatest unifier of all. 6 months later, the Truth Project launched, hosted by Catherine and Eleanor Walsh, with Jake Paul leading their digital strategy. Their first broadcast began with a simple message. Welcome to the news. No bias, no manipulation, no division. Just truth. The studio where it all began was transformed into a museum, its walls lined with the evidence that exposed Project Eclipse. But in Catherine's new office, only one photo mattered. A new one, showing the Walsh sisters and the Pauls together. Proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when truth prevails. And every morning, when Catherine Walsh looks in her dressing room mirror, she no longer sees someone bound by fear and guilt. She sees what Eleanor saw all along. A warrior for truth, just waiting for the right moment to rise. As for Jake Paul, he proved that sometimes the most powerful voices for change come from the most unexpected places. His millions of followers became truth seekers themselves, proving that social media could be a force for unity rather than division. The story of how a young social media star and a veteran journalist brought down a decades-old conspiracy became legend. But ask any of them, and they'll tell you the same thing. The real story isn't about the fall of Project Eclipse or the exposure of media manipulation. It's about the power of truth to heal, unite, and set us free. In the end, it wasn't just about humiliating a liberal host or shocking an audience. It was about something far more profound. The moment when Americans remembered how to listen to each other again, and the truth finally set them all free.